We continue now at the top of Daf Chesam and Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 8a. On the previous summer, there was a machlokas amoraim. There was an individual who's makadesh, a woman with shiroi, with silk garments, and the machlokas amoraim was, do they need a formal appraisal in order for it to be a good Kiddushin? And in the second version of the understanding of the machlokas, the case is where when he was makadesher with the shiroi, he said whatever they were worth. They didn't have to be worth any specific amount, and they certainly were worth a pruta. But nevertheless, Rav Yosef says that they do require an appraisal, and he learns that out from a pasuk which we are about to quote. And Rabbah says in that case there's no requirement for an appraisal. And Rav Yosef says, why is it the case that they need to have an appraisal? Because Shaveh Kesef has to be just like Kesef. Just like by Kesef, when you give Kesef for Kiddushin, you know exactly what it's worth. Av Shaveh Kesef nami decayed. So too when it comes to Shaveh Kesef as well, the halacha is the same. By Shaveh Kesef, if you give something that has value, that is worth money, so it has to be a set amount, you have to know exactly what it is worth. And Rashi over here says, and this Rashi is going on the previous Amud, Shaveh Kesef kekesef gabi Kiddushin Kesef ksiv. By Kiddushin it says Kesef. The Shaveh Kesef is Rabbi kekesef, and Shaveh Kesef we're including it that it's the same as Kesef. Kedamrin lekamon, like we'll say later on, Yoshiv l'Rabbo Shaveh Kesef. We're going to say that the word Yoshiv includes Shaveh Kesef, and therefore Rav Yosef says Hilkach, therefore ki Kesef bo'in indicates it has to be like Kesef, it has to be worth a set amount. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Mino aminallah, from where can I prove to you that this is the case, that it has to be worth a set amount? Titania, as we learned in a Braisa, Mikesef Miknoso, it says from the money that was used to acquire him. This pasuk is talking about Eved Ivri, it's talking about the redemption of an Eved Ivri. And we understand from that pasuk, says the Braisa, Bekesef hu nikne, that an Eved Ivri is acquired with kesef, with money. V'yeino nikne b'tvuah v'kelim, and he's not acquired with grain, with crops, or with kelim, with vessels. And so what does this Braisa mean? Hai tvua v'kelim hechidami. When this Braisa says you can't acquire an Eved Ivri with tvua and kelim, what's the case? If you're going to say it means that you can't acquire an Eved Ivri at all with tvua and kelim, but Yoshev Ge'ulaso Amar Achmana, but the pasuk says Yoshev Ge'ulaso, that's a continuation of the same pasuk. L'Rabbo Shaveh Kesef kekesef, and we learn out from that pasuk that Shaveh Kesef is the same as Kesef, so you should be able to use tvua and kelim to create the kinyan by an Eved Ivri. V'ida lesbu Shaveh Pruta. Now, if you're going to argue that the Braisa is talking about tvua and kelim that are not even worth a Shaveh Pruta, and that's why the kinyan doesn't work, but ma'irya tvua v'kelim, so then what do you have to talk about tvua and kelim for? Afilu kesef nami, the same thing would be true with kesef also, meaning to say if it's not worth a pruta, it's not only tvua, it says in the Braisa, mi kesef miknaso, and we understand bekesef, that kesef works and tvua and kelim don't work. But if you're talking about less than a Shaveh Pruta, they all wouldn't work. Kesef wouldn't work, and tvua and kelim wouldn't work. And so therefore, if Yosef says, elalav, rather than not, the ispuhu Shaveh Pruta, the case over here is that they are worth a pruta. The cave and the lokaitin, and it's exactly what Rav Yosef am saying, since it's not worth a set amount, so low, so no, that's why it's not effective. This is the source, this is where we see that it has to be a set amount, and you require the appraisal. And the Gemara continues, V'idach, now the other opinion. What does Rabbah respond? How does he understand the Braisa? Hachi Kamar, this is what the Braisa is saying. B'toras kesef unikna, meaning to say that b'toras kesef, you can use anything, it doesn't have to be money, but whatever you're using, you have to use it as if it were kesef, you have to use it like kesef. V'yein nikna b'toras tvua v'kelim, but you can't acquire the Eved Ivri with the law of tvua and kelim, which refers to umaynin. What is that? It refers to chalipin. It refers to a kinyan chalipin, meaning according to Rabbah, the Braisa simply means it's not that you're not allowed to use tvua and kelim, it's that you're not allowed to use a kinyan chalipin to acquire an Eved Ivri. But the Gemara continues with Rav Nachman. Now, according to Rav Nachman, Damar Peiros lo avdi chalipin. Rav Nachman's opinion happens to be that you can't use peiros, you can't use fruit for a kinyan chalipin, and so therefore tvua, the word tvua over here can't refer to kinyan chalipin because you can't even use peiros for kinyan chalipin. So Michael Amemar. So what are we going to say according to Rav Nachman? You can't give this answer. You can't give this interpretation of the Braisa. And so the Gemara says you're right. According to that, we have to give another interpretation of the Braisa according to Rabbah. Elo liolam delesbu Shaveh Pruta. Rather, what we'll say is that the Braisa is talking about a case where they're not worth a pruta. That's why the kinyan doesn't work. Now that which you asked, my area tvua v'kelim, why do we have to discuss tvua and kelim? Afilu kesef nami, even money also, if it's not worth a pruta, it's not a kinyan. So to that we can answer as follows. Lo mi boy kamer means not only this, even this. Lo mi boy kesef, we don't even need to tell you kesef. The ispe Shaveh Pruta in ilo lo. If it's worth a pruta, it's a good kinyan. If not, it's not. That's obvious. So ilo lo, meaning by kesef, again, it's obvious. Aval Tavua v'Kalim, but when it comes to Tavua and Kalim, so there I might actually say less than a pruta would be effective. Ema mid mekarva hanoasayu, I might say that since you're now getting the benefit immediately, meaning if I give you money, you have to exchange the money for something to derive benefit. But if I'm giving Tavua and Kalim, you can get the benefit immediately. So maybe even I might have thought, Gamaru makane nafshe, maybe even less than a shava pruta, the person is able to accept it and therefore use it to be makane himself, and the kinyan should be effective. And so that's what the Bryce is saying. Kamash Malon, the Bryce is teaching us, even by shava kesef, not only by kesef, but even by shava kesef, if it's not worth a pruta, it will not be a good kinyan. And before we take a look at Rashi, we'll look at the full pasuk. The full pasuk by Eved Ivri says, Im od rabos ba'ashanim lefihen yoshiv ge'ulaso mikesef miknaso. It's talking about the redemption of the Eved Ivri, and you have to do a calculation. How many years has he worked? How many years are left? And then it's talking about the geula, again, the redemption from the kesef that was used for his purchase. And so Rashi explains, Mikesef miknaso bi Eved Ivri ksiv. Again, this pasuk is written by Eved Ivri. Yoshiv ge'ulaso. It says Yoshiv ge'ulaso, Yoshiv kra yiseruhu. Rashi explains that the word Yoshiv is an extra word in the pasuk. The matzi lemechtav lefihen ge'ulaso. You could have just said according to the amount of years is the redemption. L'rabo shava kesef. So the word Yoshiv includes shava kesef. It's not just money. It's even things that are worth money, things that have value le'inyan pidyon. In terms of redemption, anything that's shava kesef could work. V'kevan de mifrog bei iknu yenami mikne bei. And so Rashi says, once you're able to use shava kesef to redeem the Eved Ivri, we understand that it's also good for a kinyan to acquire him in the first place. Techsiv geulaso mikesef miknaso, because it says the word geulaso next to mikesef miknaso, and so that tells us that the kinyan works with whatever the redemption works with the kinyan as well, meaning shava kesef would be effective. V'kevan de lokai, it's low since it's not a set amount. V'hachi kamar ve'eno nikne betua v'kelim ela imkein kitzetz dameh. So the first interpretation of the Bryce, according to Rav Yosef, is that since it's not a set amount, that's what it means. Tvu and kalim are not good. Since it's not a set amount, it's not good. But if you were to appraise it and it had a set amount, it would be good. And then the Gemara gave an alternate explanation. B'toras kesef, it means kinyan chalipin, the law of kesef. B'toras damim hu nikna, meaning again, if it's b'toras damim, it's a good kinyan. Bein shenos and all of kesef, bein shava kesef. It doesn't matter if it's money or something that has value. B'toras damim, as long as the shava kesef is given as though it were money, ikna would be a good kinyan. V'lo b'toras chalipin, but chalipin doesn't work. Shederach lasos chalipin b'tvuah v'kelim. It's normal to make kinyan chalipin with tvu and kalim. Kalim shenemar shalaf ishna. Alo kalim we learn from the pasuk in Ruah. So tvu nami dechsiv kol davar also. Tvu we learn. Well, Rav Nachman the Amar beparak hazav peri lo avdi chalipin. Then the Gemara said, according to Rav Nachman, he says that peiros don't affect the kinyan chalipin. Im nasan tvu b'toras chalipin kemo sudur liknos behen sado shum davar b'chalipin lo kanu. If you were to use tvu for a kinyan chalipin as though it were a sudur, it would not work. V'hai kol davar mefarish leida kol nikna b'minol. The pasuk of kol davar, according to Rav Nachman, is used for something else over there. Hashda lekol amemar toras tuva v'kelim. So according to Rav Nachman, you can't say the brisa means the law of tvu and kelim hainu chalipin, meaning referring to chalipin. You can't say that because again tvu isn't used for chalipin. So Michael amemar. So how are we going to explain the brisa? And the Gemara said aloliolam ve'ino nikna b'tvu v'kelim dekamar b'deles bushava pruta. We're talking about where it's not a pruta, and you might have thought a pruta works because mikra v'hano asayu, because the benefit is immediate mizumanim leihanos mehem, right away the person's able to derive benefit from them. You might have thought less than a pruta is effective, and that's what the Bryce is teaching us, that it is not. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef says, Mino aminallah, from where can I show you that again, if you have something that's shava kesef, it only works as a kinyan, it only works as a kiddushin, if it has an appraisal, if it's a set value. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, and this is from the Tosefta, Egel zel lepidyon b'ni. Let's say somebody says, this calf I'm using for my pidyon, for the redemption of my son, for the pidyon aben, or talis zel lepidyon b'ni, or he uses a talis for the pidyon aben, lo amar klum, so that is not effective. However, Egel zeh b'chomish saloim lepidyon b'ni. If he says, this calf worth 5 sela, that's what I'm using for the redemption of my son. Talazu b'chomish saloim lepidyon b'ni. He says, this talis, which is worth 5 sela, I'm using for the redemption of my son, b'no padei, so then it is a good redemption. And so the Gemara says, "Hi pidyon hechidami." When this brisa, when this Tosefta is talking about redemption, that it's not effective. What's the case? Ilema de lo shavi. If we're talking about where it's not even worth 5 sela in the reish of the brisa, kol kamine, does he have the power to do that? He's able. Of course, he's not able to redeem. Of course, he can't do pidyon aben with something worth less than 5 sela. Elalav afal gav de shavi. Rather, is it not talking about a situation where it is worth 5 sela? V'keven de lo kaitze. However, since it doesn't have a set amount, meaning to say it wasn't appraised, lo, so no, so it's not effective as a kinyan. That shows you again that it needs to be appraised to work as a kinyan. That's Rav Yosef's proof from this brisa. And the Gemara continues, lo, no, it could be that's not the explanation of the brisa. It could be that the explanation of the brisa is as follows. Liolam de lo shavi. It could be the brisa is talking about a situation where it's not worth 5 sela, and that's why in the ratio of the brisa it's not effective. Or could go in the kabil kohen ilavi, but the end of the brisa which says it's effective is talking about a situation where the kohen accepts it as if it's worth 5 sela. Kihad Rav Kahana, like the case with Rav Kahana, shakal sudra mi bei pidyon haben. He took a sudra, he took a cloth as part of the pidyon haben. Amar lei ledidi chazi li chamesh slam, and he said to me, this is worth 5 sela. Amar Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says, Lo Amar Nel Kagon Rav Kahana. This is only true by someone like Rav Kahana, the Gavra Rabbahu, who is an important person, Umi Boile Sudra Reshi, so he would wear this kind of scarf on his head. So to him, he could say that to me it's worth 5 sela, even if it's not. Aval Kuli Almalo, but for anyone to do that, that would not be effective. Kihad Mar Bar Rav Ashi, and it's similar to Mar Bar Rav Ashi, Zavan Sudra Me'ime de Rabba. He brought a Sudra again, he brought a Sudra from the mother of Rabba Mikuve, who was from Kuve. Shavi Asara B'Tleis, and even though it was only worth 10, he bought it for 13. Again, you see that somebody who uses a sudar, so for that person can declare that it's worth more to them. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Some Rebbe Lozer says, Hiskanchi li b'moneh, if a man says to a woman, be mekudeshes to me for a moneh, v'nasan lo dinar, and he gives her a dinar, 1 dinar out of that moneh, harezu mekudeshes v'yashlim, so that's a good kiddushin, and then he just owes her the rest of the money. He should complete his obligation. My time, what's the reason? Kevan da'amar lo moneh, because since he said to her he's going to be mekadesh her with a moneh, v'yohev lo dinar, and he's giving her a dinar at that time, keman da'amar lo menas dami, it's really like he said to her, on condition that I give you the money. In other words, he's saying to her, I'm being mekadesh you right now with this dinar, al menas, on the condition that I owe you and that I will give you the entire money. V'yomer Rav Huna Marav, and Rav Huna says that Rav says, Kol omer al manas, kol omer me'achshav dami. If a person says al manas, it's like saying from now, it's retroactive. So from this moment when he gives her the dinar, it's a good kiddushin. And again, then he owes her the rest of the money. That is the condition of the kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following brisa. This is from the Tosefta. Hiskadshi li b'moneh, let's say he says, be mekudeshes to me for a moneh, v'hayamone v'holech, and he's counting out the money. V'rotza echad mehen lachzer, and one of them wants to retract. They don't want it to be a kedushin. Afilu b'dinor ha'achron, even if they're just up to the last dinar, he's about to complete giving her the full moneh. Harashus biyado, if the person wants to be choser, the person wants to retract, they are able to retract. And so you see from here that you have to give the entire money for it to be a kiddushin. The Gemara says, no, hachab ma'askin, and here what is this Tosefta talking about? To Amar b'moneh zu, the case is not where he says b'moneh, he says with this particular money. When you say with this particular money, so then it means that the entire money has to be given for it to be a kiddushin. But the Gemara says, Hamid Seifa b'moneh zu, but from the fact that the end of this brisa, this Tosefta actually is a case of moneh zu, so don't we infer that Reisha b'moneh stam? We should infer that the beginning, the case we just quoted, is talking about moneh stam. It's not talking about this money. So then it would be a good proof to what we're discussing. It would be a proof that in general, if a person says Hiskadshi li b'moneh, he has to give the entire money. To Katani Seifa, because we learned at the end of this Tosefta, Amar lo Hiskadshi li b'moneh zu, if he said to her, Hiskadshi li b'mikudeshes to me with this money, v'nimtza moneh chaser dinar, or dinar shal nechoshes, and it turns out that the money is missing a dinar, or one of the dinars is not silver, it's copper, ain't a mikudesha, so the end of the Tosefta says that's not a good kiddushin. Dinar ra, but if it turns out that one of the dinars is a bad dinar, the Gemara will discuss that, harezu mikudeshes v'yachlef, that is a good kiddushin, and he just has to exchange it with a good dinar. And in any case, so you see from the fact that the end of the Tosefta is moneh zu, doesn't that show that the beginning of the Tosefta is just moneh stam? And the Gemara says, lo, no, not necessarily. Reisha v'seifa da'amar b'moneh zu. It could be the beginning and the end of the Tosefta are talking about moneh zu. U'perushe kamefarish, and the end of the Tosefta is explaining the beginning. Rotza echad mehen lachzar afilu b'dinor ha'achron ha'rashus biyado. If one of them wants to retract, even when it comes to the very last dinar, so that's still possible, the person still is able to retract. Ketzad, in what case are we talking about? How so? Kegon da'amar lo b'moneh zu. The case is where he says moneh zu. That's the case where he has to give the entire money, and before he finishes giving the entire money, if somebody wants to retract, they can retract. And the Gemara says, "V'hachinam mistabra." The truth is, it makes sense to say that the entire Tosefta is moneh zu. Tisal gadaita chureisha b'moneh stam, because if you think that the beginning of the Tosefta is talking about moneh stam, so hashta b'moneh stam lo have a kiddushin. So if we're already saying moneh stam, it's not a good kiddushin. So b'moneh zu, boy, do we even need to say a case of moneh zu? We wouldn't even need the seifa if the ratio was talking about moneh stam. But the Gemara says, Misham hollow area. But if that's your only proof, that's not really a proof. Tana Seifa leglu yeresha, because it could be that we do need the end of the Tosefta to tell us what the beginning of the Tosefta is talking about. Shalot Tomar Reisha b'monazu aval b'monastam have a kiddushin. You shouldn't say that the beginning of the Tosefta is by monazu, but if it would be monastam, it would be a good kiddushin, even though the whole mana hasn't yet been given. That's why it could be Tana Seifa b'monazu. The reason that therefore the Tana learns the end of the Tosefta is talking about monazu mechlal dereisha b'monastam. That would imply that the beginning of the Tosefta is by monastam. V'afilu hachi lo have a kiddushin, and still it's not a kiddushin. Meaning still it's not a kiddushin if the entire mana has not been given. One of the parties can still retract even by the very last dinar. And the Gemara continues, Rav Ashi says a different answer entirely to the Reisha of the Tosefta. Mona v'holech shani. It's different in the Reisha of the Tosefta, even though he said hiskadshi li b'moneh. And we said before that by hiskadshi li b'moneh, he only has to give a dinar, and the rest of it is just a condition. But the moment he gives a dinar, it is a kiddushin. But that's not true in the Tosefta, because in the Tosefta it says Mona v'holech. He's counting out the money. If he's counting out the money in front of her, that's different. The daita akule, because then she already has in mind that she's going to get the whole thing, and without getting the whole thing, it is not a good kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Hai dinar shel nechoshes hechidami. When we're talking about in this brisa the dinar shel nechoshes, the kap or dinar, so what exactly is the case? If the situation is by the dinar shel nechoshes, she's aware that there's a kap or dinar among the mana and the safe of the brisa, hasavar v'kivla, so she was aware of it and she accepted it as part of the mana. So then why would it say that if you find a dinar shel nechoshes, it's not a good kiddushin? It should be a good kiddushin. And so the Gemara says, Lo, no, it's tzricha, the case is necessary. Do you have in Hile Belelia? He gave it to her at night. She wasn't aware there was a dinar shel nechoshes. That's what the seifa of the brisa is talking about. Inami d'shtakach le bein izuze, or she found it among the other dinarim, and so therefore again she wasn't aware of it, and that's why when it's discovered, it is not a good kiddushin. And the Gemara continues in the seifa of the brisa, Hai dinar ra hechidami. What does it mean that if one of the dinars is a bad dinar, then it said it is a kiddushin? What exactly is the case? Idalo nafik, if it's a dinar that cannot be used in the marketplace, so hainu dinar shel nechoshes, that's the same as a dinar shel nechoshes, it should not be good. Amar Papa says, Kagon de nafik al yedei adachak. We're talking about a dinar which actually could be used. Now, it can't be used in a standard traditional case, but in a case where you're forced, al yedei adachak, in a shas adachak, in a pressing situation, it could be used. And so that's why the brisa says that it is a good kiddushin, even if a dinar ra is found among the monah. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. Rava says that Rav Nachman says, Amar lo hiskadshi li b'moneh. If he says to her, be mekudeshes to me for a moneh, v'hiniach lo mashkon ala, and instead of giving her the moneh, he gives her collateral for it. Eina mekudeshes, that is not a good kiddushin. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.